morning. Good morning. Well, good morning here. Good morning, LinkedIn Live. And good morning to anyone watching the replay. And good morning, Dwayne. I feel like, in fact, I should be saying good evening or good day. Good day, mate.
Good day will do. It's hit 5:30 over here. It's 8:30 there.
It is. It's 8:30 a.m. in the morning. So Dwayne is joining us from whereabouts in Australia are you again, Dwayne, for us?
I'm in Sydney, Australia,
In
on the east
Sydney.
coast of the space, and yeah, it's been so far pretty good Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Welcome to Global
Yeah,
Accessibility Awareness Day.
yeah, absolutely. Happy Global Awareness Accessibility Day for anybody that hasn't heard of it. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But it gets abbreviated, right, to GAAD,
GAD.
GAD, which is much easier. So just a quick intro to Dwayne. Dwayne, thank you so much. Dwayne, we met on Clubhouse. We may get into Clubhouse. So Dwayne is an Indian-born Australian double amputee and recently diagnosed with ADHD that we might get into if we have time. Dwayne has dedicated his career to improving accessibility for citizens of New South Wales as manager, and then now through his consulting company Idea Services, Dwayne improves businesses to deliver accessibility for all. He's also co-founder of Minds at Play, which is a gaming company that helps players build communication skills and social skills through games like Dungeons and Dragons, which I remember when I was little, the show, and also Minecraft. But also, Dwayne doesn't only do that stuff, he's set world records, including stair climbing at the Empire State Building, and also has his sights on becoming the first double amputee in space. On his way to achieving it, through Astro Access flights as an ambassador. So, Dwayne, is there anything you haven't done? I'm feeling like
Sleep?
I'm feeling like an underachiever.
No, no, yeah, sleep. I guess that's what's missing right
Yeah.
now.
When did you move to Australia? Just interested there. When did you move to Oz? How long have you been there?
So I went from immigration occurred when we went from Bombay to Auckland, New Zealand, and
Okay.
that was in early 90s, and I
Mm,
got to Sydney in 1999. So high school was over here,
okay.
university was over here, career was over here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's because as a person with a disability, I
Yeah.
have a pretty savvy mum that considered what is the life of a person with a disability in India compared to anywhere else in the world, and
Mm,
chose to look for a better life for me. So
yeah.
thankful. That's why I'm here.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah, fantastic, fantastic. And it's interesting. One of the things we were talking about was kind of like the differences between Australia and the UK, which we'll probably get into when we talk about the infrastructure. But I know you've got some badges around you that kind of, I guess, help to kind of almost like visualize the breadth of who Dwayne is. So just share some of the badges that you've got kind of on
So
and around you.
so I'm wearing an Enable Network badge, and I'll
Mhm.
put it on the screen, but the lighting might be a bit
Yeah, we got it.
problematic. This
Yeah,
this
yeah,
badge is color yellow and
yeah,
with a very faint outline of
yeah,
um, different types of disability communities on that space.
yeah.
It is a peer support employee network that I was lucky enough to be the chair of because I asked a hard question about where are my people
Mhm.
in the state government, and
Yeah,
they made me a chair of the Enable network. And when we started, it was 50 people,
yeah.
and by the time I left, it grew to 300. And now when I check in on it, it's over 500 people in New South
Wow.
Wales that are from this organization that feel really supported,
Yeah,
and that is a very digital and cohesive network for a size of organization that fits in a area as big as Texas. New South
right.
Wales is about that size, and so the
Okay.
people in that company are all over in that space, and so they all
Yeah,
feel included through that format, and
amazing.
that's the Enable network.
Yeah, okay. So that was kind of like sort of almost like your day job for quite a while, I guess, working with New South Wales. But you've got some other really exciting badges, and
Yes.
it goes into our first question, I guess, which is I had a question about, space exploration. So this ambition that you've got, why space? How did you get interested in it? And then maybe we'll get onto how it links into accessibility. So why space?
Absolutely. So, like most kids, I want to be an astronaut, right? just like just like
Was
most kids. Here's a cute picture of Dwayne when he's 2 years old. Now you've seen this before in some other bits
well,
and pieces.
yeah.
That's me when I had legs. That's my mom holding me with this giant thing.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
Houston in 1987. Here's a
Wow. Okay.
here's my dad in an EVA suit. That's a dodgy looking pram that I was in
Yeah.
back in the
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah. Like a
And
proper boogie. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's a guy looking at basically a person that looks like him in a spacesuit. And always been a thing that I wanted to go to space. But as a person with a disability, there are quite a few barriers between there and that. And I was back in Clubhouse days when we were all stuck inside
Yeah.
a pandemic. I got lucky enough to be one of those early people, just like you, asking those
Mm,
questions
mm,
around and focusing on things that we were really interested in. Because
mm.
if we're all stuck in the house, we're all in the space. And
Absolutely.
I started to ask questions to astronauts in Clubhouse on Small Steps and Giant Leaps. And I asked them about display inclusion in space. So much to the point that I got a show on that Clubhouse channel, and people would stay up late and listen about display inclusion in space. Um, After a while, Astro Access comes along, and
Right.
this is the organization that I applied to be part of. 13 people said, go apply for this thing. And I'm glad that I did because I was one of the 16 people that were Astro Access ambassadors that went on a parabolic flight to do display inclusion in space. So I was
Mm,
lucky enough to one get selected and then two work with this amazing
yeah.
team of astronauts and excitable people with disabilities with a variety of different disabilities
Yeah.
talking about disability inclusion and putting experiments on a zero G plane, which is you take a plane, you
Mhm.
pull it up intensely, and then you drop it, and that motion, which is yeah, it feels intense, but it
Yeah.
actually gives you
Yeah.
a zero G feeling for up to
Yeah.
20 seconds, and
Mhm.
that blew my mind. I wrote poetry after that, right? Because it, oh, you're not going to hear any of that poetry today, but I was lucky enough to also adjust the mission patch so that
Amazing.
so those symbols that you saw on the bottom of the
Yeah.
enable network
Yeah.
made their way back into the actual flight patch, and I
Nice.
managed to get Australia on top of that flight patch, which is yay for us.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. That is
Um,
brilliant.
and so, yet earlier on today at 1 o'clock, when I was up at an ungodly hour, we were speaking to Explore Mars, which was about humans on Mars summit, and we were talking about accessibility in space. And they are quite excited to hear about how to make space sustainable and last longer. Because when you make things accessible,
Yeah.
what you're doing is actually improving it for everybody.
Yeah.
People are using accessible technologies all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. And I guess, and when we think about space, we do think innovation, future, cutting edge, all of that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of makes sense, I guess, that those sorts of organizations, when we think about space exploration, why wouldn't accessibility be at the forefront, right? Because they're kind of at the forefront of everything, as sort of Captain Kirk used to say, the final frontier.
It's assumed to be true, but effectively up to this point in time, um, we've been dealing with the old school way of thinking about space, right?
Right.
It's my white right guy versus your white right guy in the race to get to the moon. And that thinking still exists with elements of it. But as you're building rockets that become larger and more complex, you're getting to a stage where you want the commercialization of space. The commercialization of space is where ordinary citizens who have a very important skill that they need up there
Yeah.
goes up there, but they don't know everything else, and they're not
Yeah.
going to be like um, you know Neil Armstrongs or
Yeah.
or Yuri. And the objective over here is to diversify it and make it simpler
Yeah.
so that your mission can survive with people who are there for their particular skill, like farming. That's a skill
Yeah.
you're going to need up there. And
Right.
when you make it display inclusive and you make it accessible,
Yeah.
what you're doing is making it safer for the general population to
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah.
For if you are missing a hand, it's the same as holding a baby,
Right.
the same functionality when you're engaging in that. So
Yeah.
this is that thing about when you're dealing with
Mm,
humans, it's about interactions and barriers, the social
yeah.
model of disability.
Yeah.
And humans only interact in a few key ways:
Yeah.
hearing, sight, mobility, speech, thinking, and that capacity building or invisible type disabilities.
Yeah.
And if you solve for those, you're going to get some really good outcomes.
Yeah. And and as you were talking there in terms of, I guess, a why space and why, as you were talking there about, if you think about the future and you think about, that people potentially want to, as you say, commercialize it and go to space, potentially inhabit. Let's hope we don't go and destroy another planet, but let me not get onto that soapbox. Right? But there is something about the diversity that you need to create that, but then also in terms of sustainability for the people that are there, how do you create a space that kind of work? Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So what are some of the, if we get onto some of the the sort of initiatives and the interventions, what are some of the leading edge companies doing in terms of accessibility? What are some of the most innovative companies doing?
So there's a lot of cool things happening right now, right? It's an awesome time to be alive. And that's most generations will say that, but I'm
Yeah,
excited at the precipice that's
yeah,
happening up here.
yeah,
But with regards to accessibility and what's happening in this space, uh,
yeah.
many people are looking at how you make things easily accessible. Now,
Hmm.
in the space of digital technologies, there's a lot of great innovations occurring. If you want to think about it from the perspective of like your large companies such as Microsoft and Google,
Yeah.
their products have built accessibility because they need to be compliant.
Hmm.
You, as the person who purchases those products, are going
Yeah.
to get accessible products that you can deliver for your clients. So
Yeah.
the excuses for delivering accessibility have dropped because
Mhm.
the barrier for entry is dropped. But in the area of where you're seeing these things like chat gpt and those
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
ai generate elements, apply that logic to describing what's in front of you to a person who cannot see.
Right. Right.
You get an efficient real-time navigation system if you
Yeah.
utilize it correctly. And your objective in this space is to utilize it for moving through areas.
Yeah.
There are upgrades in things like canes that actually have GPS trackers in them. So they're no longer just an empty stick.
Yeah.
Um, and in this area, if you're making your wayfinding and your accessibility uh, easier, what you're going to do is actually make it safer for most people.
Mhm.
And this is the type of things you really want to do. And so areas such as transport, you're looking at essential things such as, am I including everybody in
Mhm.
this public system?
Right.
Because if I don't include everybody in this public system, am I inviting legal ramifications? And in
Right.
places like Australia, our legislation around disability inclusion is strong. It
Okay.
is, my personal opinion, I believe it's stronger than the US.
Yeah.
And this is because the Disability Discrimination Act, one person in a wheelchair sued the Queensland government for making the trains inaccessible. The accessible bathrooms were not there. The
Mhm.
accessible bathroom was not wide enough for a wheelchair, and the
Okay.
passageway was not wide enough for a wheelchair to go through. One person sued them. Can you guess the retrofit cost? Throw a number out there.
Millions and millions. I mean, yeah, millions and millions now.
Yeah, it ended up the initial ruling was $500 million. And if you're thinking about it from that type of perspective, how many companies go broke if you're not thinking about accessibility?
Oh my
And
God.
when they reassessed it, they got it down to $350 million. But how expensive is it to talk to a person with a disability?
Yeah. Yeah.
It all depends on when you talk to us, right?
Yeah.
If all we have is the stick, we will use the stick. But
Yeah.
I would rather
Mhm.
you talk to me as you're designing, because if you make it inclusive of me, you're making it inclusive
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? Sometimes, and something we'll go on to. Sometimes organizations, almost like fear the cost of making something accessible. But when you compare it to that, the cost of not making it accessible, if you're then, sued or you're breaching regulations or whatever, that's huge, actually, isn't it? So that's a clear case.
Flip the conversation around.
Yeah,
If you do not have people buying your products, it's because you
yeah,
don't have market share.
yeah,
Make it accessible, you increase your market share
yeah,
by a quarter.
yeah,
And so that's the argument right now around the commercialization of space and making it inclusive, because you want these people to buy into your space company as opposed to somebody else's space
yeah,
company.
yeah,
And so if you make it accessible and inclusive, you have a better chance of getting
yeah,
our money. And that's what those are the commercial benefits you want to think about from that way.
absolutely,
There's
yeah,
always the thing that it's the right thing to do and all those things, but
yeah.
sometimes if you're a business, you want to think about it from that type of perspective.
Oh,
I get that.
100%, 100%. And I think it's both, isn't it? The way I heard somebody describe it, which I often talk about the business case of, diversity, inclusion, etc. But you have the moral case, which is, it's the right thing to do, but the business case, and they always go sort of side by side. There is always both, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so what are the something about? Let's talk about some of the more basic things that lots of companies do that make their workplaces, whether that be physical or online or whatever, inaccessible. So because people don't know what they don't know, right? And if they haven't
Correct.
gone out and talked to experts and gotten people like you and etc., they don't know what they're doing. So how do we, unknowingly make our workplaces inaccessible?
I'll talk about the stuff that most of us are dealing with, right?
Sure.
Your Word document, your
Yeah.
PowerPoint presentation. If you have Office 365, there is literally a button that says review, check accessibility. It'll spell out exactly how inaccessible that document that you're about to give to a client is and the
Amazing.
steps to fix it.
Right.
This is because that um, Office 365 and Microsoft suites of products are now
Yeah.
compliant of WCAG compliance,
Right.
WCAG. If you're building a system,
Yeah.
ask yourself the following question: Who is using it? Who is being employed to use it?
Yeah.
And if you're building something that is inaccessible,
Yeah.
then are you limiting employment for the people that you're doing
Yeah.
for doing that space, right?
Yeah.
So simply reviewing your documents before you PDF it and put it out into the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
will make it easier for us to engage and buy into your company.
Right.
There are a lot of very cheap, free even, accessibility checkers that you can easily get a hold of,
Okay.
and just check your content. We
Yeah.
want to hear your message.
Yeah.
We want to know about what exactly you're selling and is it suitable for us?
Yeah.
Because, well, we might be your next customer.
Yeah.
And if you're selling us something, make sure it's in a format that is we can all read it.
Yeah.
And the way we read it sometimes is not with our eyes, but with the screen reader.
Yeah.
And when you read a document through an inaccessible screen reader, it's difficult. And therefore, I will consider going to your competitor who's made it a little bit easier.
Right. Yeah. So documents presentation. So in those forms of communication, making sure that we use the tools that are embedded in them already and consider the accessibility point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for that, you then can then hire the community that allows us to make it an employable element for us, right? So Minds at Play is my favorite organization because I got to make it with a couple of my buddies. And it has gone from 4 players during the pandemic to 400 this term, and that is in June 2020 till now. And I can tell you, based on the stats of our people that we have with us, it's
Yeah.
50% people with disability,
Right.
50% women, 28% LGBTQIA, and the rest are pale, male, and stale. I said that
Yeah.
jokingly, but they're awesome games masters, all of them.
Well,
Uh,
good morning, Maxine, by the way. I can just see Maxine's comment. Loving the advice. Thank you for joining us, Maxine. Yeah, go carry on, Dwayne. Sorry, so you
yes.
see the play.
And so effectively, this company is working remotely and has access to the best talent because it's not fixed to a physical location.
Right.
Embrace the digital.
Yeah, so remote.
And if you can give people the right tools, they can socialize and bond. People tend to wonder how can people socialize and bond over hybrid space.
Yeah.
I'm seeing an entire social network of employees that really enjoy each other's company, that didn't know each other, were in completely different states from each other, that when they want to now meet up in physical, they actually take the effort. They take planes, they take trains, and they come to events because they're like, I like this person. I would never met this person, but they're now my friend. And you can really drive social from a distance too. And that's by making your space accessible and inclusive.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, the remote working thing, because we know that a lot of in fact, so I did a LinkedIn live with Maxine, who's in facilities management, and we know that a lot of organizations are wrestling with this. Do we get people back in? Do we leave them all online, etc.? I mean, so we met on Clubhouse app, right? Which is interesting. When you were talking about sort of your connecting to the astronauts through Clubhouse. Clubhouse was audio only. and some of the connections and bonds that were formed on that app were really, really powerful, and so there is
Absolutely.
this thing about, we're some businesses are still so wedded to face, but that can really be such a barrier when it comes to, accessibility and disability inclusion, right?
Absolutely. It's basically a barrier for you growing your business. If you're focusing on business,
Yeah,
it's a barrier for you growing your business. My organization partners
yeah,
with universities in Queensland, South
yeah,
Australia.
yeah. Take some water. You've been talking a lot the last few
Yeah.
days, right? It's been a long
Yeah. So
grab there.
so basically, because I've embraced that we can be digital and we can get the
Yeah,
best from the thing, I
yeah,
have no problems talking to people on the other side of the world
yeah,
and engaging with them and finding their expertise. We made some awesome partnerships with people in Hero Forge, in people in UK, in
yeah,
doing Tailspire, and all these different organizations. We get the benefits of it because we're thinking embrace an accessible, inclusive future,
yeah.
and that's what you want to. If you want to grow, that's the way you got to do
Mm,
it.
yeah. And there's something about, obviously, GAD is like a global accessibility awareness. And we were talking before we joined about, the infrastructure. And I guess the benefit of being global, we can understand then also what different countries are doing and where the focus has been. So one of the things we talked about, which you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was the UK's infrastructure, which in terms of buildings, for example, we have a lot of old buildings, right, which we love because they're beautiful and all of that, but that does present some accessibility challenges, doesn't it?
So yes, I'll give you an example of Australian legislation versus that to give you an
Yeah,
understanding of the space. Heritage listing is what they call this building is a beautiful building and
yeah,
it is needs to be heritage and protected because of our heritage,
yeah,
and I get that. But the question is, are you still using it for its original purpose? Is it still being used for the reason it was built for? And if
right.
the answer is no, it's actually built. We're now actually using because the view to the point out there is actually beautiful. You're not actually using it for the original thing. It's not a prison anymore. It's
Right.
actually something
Yeah,
else. And so what we love about Australian law is that heritage listing in Australia is a
yeah,
state-based legislation. The
yeah,
Disability Discrimination Act is a federal-based legislation,
mhm,
which means that federal beats state. And what that happens is that, yes, I guess it's a beautiful building.
yeah,
You need me to be there. I need to be there. It's your federal requirement that I need to have access to
yeah,
this space. And so that leads us to very innovative solutions. There are
yeah,
some really beautiful old buildings that
mhm,
now have some impressive accessibility features within it because they've had to go, it's coming. Do I
yeah,
destroy these stairs or do I make the ramp elegant and feel aesthetically part of it? I
mhm,
need to add the wayfinding. So do I make it feel like it's you know ugly and unexpected? No, I need to make this space look beautiful because I need patrons there.
yeah,
And so because the legislation is strong
mm,
and because the need for inclusion is there, you
yeah,
end up with some beautiful expansions. You
yeah,
you get from buildings that are ancient that open up into new corridors that are more inclusive.
yeah,
And people know then to utilize the newer spaces and you end up with some really cool
yeah,
outcomes.
yeah. And the thing that you said in there as well that I really, sort of really resonated was innovative solutions. Because I think sometimes we get stuck in almost quite a binary world of, you know, it's too difficult to make it accessible, or we just think, accessibility means cost and disruption and all of that, or accessibility means we lose the heritage angle. But as you're saying, there is innovation to do it in a way that still retains the best of the heritage, but still also makes it accessible. And that's the thing, isn't it?
Good.
And-
It's the floor. The floor of the building is not something that people are looking at. They came
Yeah,
in there to look at what's in front of them and
yeah,
what's above them.
yeah,
I'm not
that's
asking you to destroy your ceiling.
yeah,
I'm asking you to make it so that I can
mm,
enter with dignity.
yeah, yeah,
Dignity is the key point over here. We're
interesting.
not interested in that side dodgy back entrance
Yeah,
because you didn't enter that way, and neither should we. And if you feel that there's a dignity issue in what you're doing, then the question is that place still fit for purpose?
yeah,
And the
yeah,
answer is not fit for purpose.
yeah,
Why are you using it?
yeah,
Um, and that's the argument that you
yeah.
raise.
Can we? And I just want to take a slight detour as well because it's global, and we've sort of talked about the learnings. One of the things we talked about before we came on was identity and language and words when it comes to disability. And I know this is a conversation. I think we had this conversation on Clubhouse as well.
Yeah.
Long live Clubhouse for anybody that's still on it. But because I remember you had a particular word, and I never forget it. And the word was diffability that you were kind of almost like hoping was going to catch on.
Oh no, that was a failed example, right? So, and it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes.
Absolutely. And this is the thing about language in the space of identity, diversity. It evolves, right? And it moves and it changes, and you see what works and what doesn't work. And so, talk to me about your thoughts on identity and use of language in terms of.
Love that deep cut. Yes. So, yeah, and it's a case of because my learning on it was also not there, and it's all at different stages. With regards to how people identify with disability, it's based on, like I said, it's based on how they feel in the society that they're in, how much stigma is there, and how happy they are with who they are as a person. Now, what I love about the UK, and this is an interesting movement because I'm in Australia and watching the UK movement and watching the US movement, it pulls, right? So the UK's movement is disability first. I am a person. I am a disabled person.
Yeah.
It is my identity.
Yeah.
And the other version of it is I'm a person with a disability. The disability isn't my identity; it is part of who I am. And it applies differently for different parts of the sub community, right? So the deaf community has an awesome culture, and so it's the deaf community. Autism seems to be autistic person. It's identity first more than person with autism, which is like a bag. That's a joke. And so, depending on how you identify, it's based on your geographical things. Now, there are places that they call it person with determination. And that is the if I'm the Saudi part of the world that has gone down the path. But the language now, people will hear that and go, "Oh, that's the worst." And I get that feeling when you've bought yourself to these things. The language before that was even more colorful. And if you go back enough in your history, the language of disability has changed. It used to be, and there used to go to this the specific center, and we'll not say those colorful words. And it used to be in the legislation, part of the handicap. I will say that word because it's older, but those aren't the languages that we use. And that's because our identity with regards to how we see ourselves in the space is what defines us. Do people with glasses think themselves as people with disability? Chances are they don't, because the accessibility, the accommodation is so seamless that it's not a disability in their viewpoint, but they're part of our community. And half the people don't realize they're part of the community. Things like sleep apnea, things like what do you call again? Like anything that is 6 months old, and it's a condition that you're going to live with. That's a disability community.
Exactly. It's big. It's
part
much
of us.
broader. Yeah, it's much broader than people think. I think you're absolutely right. And what you said actually, it's because the impact of those things, maybe the person doesn't perceive it to be as as kind of impactful.
And it all depends on how many things you're being brought down with. If society's pulling you down, then obviously that's the way they're going to see it. They're like, "Oh, I don't want to be seen with this identity. I want to be something else. I want to be some type of ability as opposed to this."
Anyway, so before we go, the final thing that I wanted to ask you, when people think about accessibility, they often think about costs, and you've mentioned some of the really good tips that people can put in place already that are like free. Because a lot of companies, maybe they're thinking, oh, we don't have a big budget, and they're thinking about this, that, and the other. We have already proven, I think, actually there is a case for doing this as opposed to not doing this. But what are some of the simple things that companies can do, even if they don't have a big budget in terms of accessibility?
I started Minds at Play with $4,000.
Right. Okay.
Disability inclusion is not only required, but it is profitable. If you include as many people as possible and you make them feel safe and welcome, which is what accessible features do for the community, they're going to give you money. If you're thinking about it from a business perspective and that's all you want, great. But if it's a case that you're going to leave society in a more inclusive way than you left it for your people, that's kind of where we want you to get to. And in this area, there's always the good and the required, and you've got to decide what makes sense for you. Or your competitor might do that before you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are I know you've got a really interesting framework for what people should be thinking about when they think about accessibility. Should we leave?
Absolutely. So when I think about accessibility and inclusion, I think about it in three broad areas: inclusive infrastructure, inclusive service delivery, and inclusive employment. Now, with those right hats on, with inclusive infrastructure, you know exactly what you need to think about and the right people to have in the room so that you build it to be the most inclusive. Inclusive service delivery, you're thinking about more of the communities that link in the area of understanding. So the capacity and the site and the wayfinding. But with infrastructure, it's a little bit more about the mobility and dexterity and the wayfinding. And then if you build it all correctly, what you're going to end up with is the community working for you. And you're going to end up in a space that you're able to hire the community, and they're going to keep it accessible, not only for themselves, but for all their friends and family. And that's what you want to think about. Keeping those frameworks in the mind allows you to have the right focus as you drive towards inclusion on Global Accessibility Awareness Day and beyond.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And what an amazing place to come to bring this conversation to a close. Where can people find you, Dwayne, if they want help? Is LinkedIn the best place to find you?
You have me on LinkedIn, as well as you can find us on our Idea Services website. I'll drop that into the chat as well. And if need be, you always have Cheryl. She'll always get to me.
I will do. And you work with global organizations as well, don't you? Not just in Australia. Yeah.
Objectively, what we need you to do is get to a framework that you're thinking about yourself and learning it from yourself. And ideally, the objective is to teach you how to do it yourself and how to maintain it yourself. That's how you keep your costs low.
Yeah.
I'd rather you build the knowledge and you teach other people and eliminate me. I don't need to do this job.
Yeah.
You need to.
More sustainable. So if anybody is wrestling with what to do, and particularly if you want that global lens or you want to bring the best of the global into your organization, you definitely need to be talking to Dwayne about it. That's perfect. Dwayne, thank you so much for your time. I'm conscious that you're at the end of a long couple of days of talks and all sorts of things. So enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you soon. Take care.